Welcome back to Hidden Points. Today, we dive into one of the most chilling psychological behaviors a person can face, the silent treatment. It's a weapon made not of shouting, but of absence, a punishment built from quiet that can feel louder than any scream. To understand why some people use silence as their strongest form of communication, we'll start with three powerful stories. First, there's Emily, a 15-year-old who remembers how her mother would go days without speaking to her whenever she made a mistake. No yelling, no explaining, just freezing her out. Emily would sit in her room crying, believing she had become invisible. Then there's Jacob, a high school senior who learned early that his father would punish disobedience with silence, turning their house into a cold museum of closed doors and long pauses. And finally, there's Madison, a college freshman who uses the silent treatment on her friends. Not because she wants to hurt them, but because she learned that silence was the only way to feel powerful when her emotions became overwhelming. These stories might feel dramatic, but they reveal a universal truth. The silent treatment is rarely about silence itself. Instead, it's a desperate attempt to control fear, uncertainty, or vulnerability. Psychology shows that when people shut down communication, they are often trying to protect themselves from emotional overload. One of the strongest theories behind this behavior is the concept of demand-withdraw patterns. This is where one person seeks closeness, answers, or reassurance, while the other withdraws emotionally and physically, hoping the distance will reduce tension. But instead, it creates even more fear for both sides. Inside the mind of the person giving the silent treatment, there is usually a storm of unresolved emotions. Research shows that people who use the silent treatment often struggle with emotional regulation, meaning they can't express anger, sadness, or disappointment directly. So, they retreat into silence, hoping the world or the person in front of them will magically understand what they are feeling. Sometimes, silence becomes a shield, especially for people who grew up in unpredictable homes. For a child who feared conflict, silence was safer than speaking. Now, as an adult, this behavior becomes a learned survival strategy that activates whenever they feel threatened, misunderstood, or powerless. For others, the silent treatment becomes a subtle way to regain control when they feel someone has crossed a boundary. Instead of arguing, they disappear emotionally, creating a psychological vacuum that forces the other person to chase after clarity, comfort, or closure. This is precisely why the silent treatment is so painful for the person on the receiving end. Humans are wired for connection. When someone withdraws emotionally, the brain interprets it as social rejection. According to studies from neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger, this triggers the same neural pathways as physical pain. That means when someone ignores you, your brain reacts as if you were physically hurt. That's why Emily cried in her room, why Jacob walked on eggshells around his father, and why Madison's friends felt deeply confused and scared, wondering if they'd done something unforgivable. Silence isn't neutral. It's communication through absence. And when used intentionally, it becomes a psychological punishment that destabilizes the emotional balance between people. The danger is that the silent treatment creates profound insecurity. It makes someone question their worth, their value, and their place in the relationship. This can form what psychologists call attachment anxiety, where the silenced person becomes desperate, hyperalert, and overly self-blaming. But what makes the silent treatment even more complicated is that not everyone who uses it wants to manipulate others. Some are terrified of conflict, and silence becomes their escape. Others are overwhelmed by emotions they never learned to name, so silence becomes their only vocabulary. And some genuinely believe that silence protects the relationship from further damage, not realizing that the silence itself is the wound. If we look deeper, the silent treatment is often rooted in childhood experiences. Children who were ignored, abandoned, or emotionally neglected learn that silence equals power, or that silence equals safety. Those who were punished with silence internalize the belief that love can disappear without warning. Many perfectionistic kids grow up into adults who freeze emotionally whenever they fear disappointing someone, because they learned early on that mistakes equal silence, and silence equals danger. This cycle continues until someone becomes aware of it. The psychology of the silent treatment is ultimately the psychology of emotional vulnerability. It's about people who were never taught how to express pain in a healthy way, so they express it by disappearing. It's about people who fear saying the wrong thing, so they say nothing at all. And it's about people who equate silence with protection, even though it destroys trust, closeness, and emotional safety. For the person on the receiving end, the pain is real. Being ignored makes the brain feel abandoned, and abandonment is one of our deepest human fears. That's why the silent treatment can destroy friendships, romantic relationships, and even families. People can't heal from wounds they aren't allowed to talk about. They can't fix problems they aren't allowed to understand. And they can't reach someone who is emotionally hiding behind a wall of silence. But understanding the psychology behind this behavior creates the possibility of breaking the cycle. The truth is, most people who give the silent treatment aren't evil or manipulative. They are overwhelmed, scared, or emotionally underdeveloped. And most people who receive it are not weak. They are human beings reacting to rejection exactly as humans are wired to do. So, if you've ever been on either side of the silent treatment, know that it doesn't define you. It simply reflects how you learned to survive emotionally. But survival strategies don't have to become permanent identities. Healthy communication comes from learning to speak even when your voice shakes. It comes from learning to listen even when the truth is uncomfortable. And it comes from learning to stay even when silence feels so much easier. That is the psychology of the silent treatment, why some people shut down, why some chase after answers, and why silence can become one of the most powerful emotional behaviors a person can use or endure. Thanks for watching.